So, as we discussed last week, one of the first people to write about the role of management was the American Frederick Taylor. And Taylor is thought of as one of the first management consultants. As we'll see from today's lecture, Taylor's ideas still apply to many different areas of management. They're still relevant today, in other words. However, not everyone takes the view that money is what motivates people to do a particular job. In today's lecture, I'd like to look at a number of theories related to motivation and management. And I want to answer these three questions. What are the things that motivate people? How have these different theories developed over time? And how have they influenced each other? So, first we'll look in more detail at Taylor's idea that money is the key motivator in the workplace. Then we'll move on to look at one of the most famous theories of motivation, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Some of you may be already familiar with this. After that, we're going to see how Maslow's ideas influenced the work of Douglas McGregor in the 1960s. And then finally, I want to take a look at a slightly different view of motivation developed by McClelland and Burnham, which was all about power. Frederick Taylor was, as you know, responsible for developing the theory of scientific management. This idea was based on late 19th, early 20th century working practices. And it was all about increasing efficiency in the workplace. So, doing the same amount of work using less time and less money. Taylor's theory, as we've seen, was based on the idea that people are motivated mainly by money. Essentially, if you pay someone enough money, then they'll be willing to do any job. Okay? At first, very few people question this relatively early concept of motivation. However, as psychology, the study of psychology started to become more accepted, more ideas about motivation started to emerge. And this happened right through the second half of the 20th century. So, much later, in the 1940s and 1950s, you have the psychologist Abraham Maslow, the man most people probably associate with theories of motivation. In 1943, Maslow published a paper in which he divided motivation into 5 main areas in hierarchy. A hierarchy of needs. This was followed a few years later by a book, Motivation and Personality. And we'll talk more about this in a moment. Now, Maslow's theory caused a lot of discussion and debate, and consequently, a number of other theories emerged quite quickly afterwards. One theory that soon followed Maslow was McGregor's theory of management styles. McGregor divided his theory of management into 2 groups, Theory X and Theory Y. Theory X was heavily influenced by the lower levels of Maslow's hierarchy, and Theory Y was influenced by the higher levels of the hierarchy. Sometime later in the 1970s, McClelland and Burnham looked at motivation in a different way. Unlike McGregor, they didn't think about how a manager could motivate workers. Instead, they focused on what motivates the manager. And they concluded that managers are mainly motivated by power. I'll come back to this point later. As we've already seen, perhaps the most famous theory of motivation is Maslow's theory of hierarchy of needs. Maslow's theory is usually shown in a pyramid. like the one on the slide here and in your handout. Now, if you look at the labels on each level, these are quite broad, quite general. So it may not be clear exactly what Maslow means. So let's look at each one in detail. Firstly, at the bottom, you have the physiological needs, the essential things we need to survive, to live. So things like food, water, a place to live, the basics. And in terms of work, this need is met by a person receiving a basic salary, their basic pay. The next level up is called security needs, which is the need to feel safe and secure. So in terms of work, this means things like job security and a pension. Next, we have belonging. Now, this can be understood as the need to feel part of a group. In other words, to have friends and to feel close to people you work with, to your colleagues. Okay, moving up. Number 4 is esteem. Esteem needs are connected to status. It's about being accepted and respected by other people. An obvious example of this at work is someone's job title. Are they a manager or are they a director? Finally, the highest level is self-actualization. This comes from a sense of achievement. To fulfill this need, people need to have a job that they find challenging, to feel they are achieving everything they are capable of. Although, of course, not everyone gets to this level. Now, Maslow believed that the needs of each level had to be satisfied before a person could move up to the next level. So, for example, if you take someone at work, their physiological needs, like having a basic salary, have to be met before they can start to think about security needs, such as having a pension plan. Maslow also argued that people had to move from one level to the next level in the hierarchy. They couldn't miss a level. In other words, it's not possible to go straight from physiological needs to belonging needs. How that works is that, according to Maslow, as one need is met, people start to feel that they want to fulfill the other needs. But not everyone needs to reach the top level. As I said, in terms of their work, some people may just be happy meeting the lower level needs.